immense pleasure to invite Dr. Anupama Ohra, Professor, Department of English, University of Jammu, Jammu and Kashmir, to deliver the last plenary lecture of this conference.
At the outset, I would like to put on record my sincere gratitude to the President, Cape Cameron Trust, and for giving me an opportunity to share my research with the August gathering here today. And since I joined late, but it was wonderful listening to Professor Julie Gerland, and well, I have taken these three words because these heal, empower, and enlighten are somehow connected to my presentation also. Thank you, madam. Well, today I'll be speaking on the human interest with pandemic in iconic in iconic Indian literature. We have all faced the brunt of pandemic, and I have tried to see it from the language, literature, and humanities perspective because these three have an interdependent relationship. We all agree to it that literature and language are like the two sides of the same coin, and it is impossible to imagine one without the other. And humanities help us to make connections to why things are the way they are, learn to think critically, and develop a solid foundation for innovation. And in times of adversity, people turn to humanities for direction and understanding, allowing people to make informed, culturally, and ethically responsible decisions, taking cue from the past to critically analyze the present. And against this background, I'll be presenting my paper, which is a rereading of the representation of pandemic in the form of plague, influenza, cholera, etc. in iconic Indian literature, to underscore that these texts offer insight into the lives of the common people, their resilience against the onslaught of death, thus serving as a source of consolation, humanist concern in time of COVID-19, to reinforce that the world today, which we know was shaped by the pandemics of the past. Well, we are all aware that crises, disasters, and calamity, pandemics have been an important part of human history, finding reference, becoming the background of works of literature, or sometimes resulting in the creation, production of masterpieces of literature. Besides that, the devastation caused by pandemics, which I address as the mass murderers, impacted many writers across India since early times who through poems, short stories, novels, essays have not only given heartrending stories of grim sorrow and death, but also exposed the self-centeredness, class and caste hierarchies and divisions, as well as orthodoxy and superstitious grip in which people remain caught, as well as the selfless dedication of a few to serve pandemic victims without fearing for their own life and health safety. These narratives, whether based on reality or created from the imagination of authors, highlight epidemics, diseases, and quarantines as consistent and well-spread topos that invite the reader to reflect on the ancestral fear of humans toward infectious disease. Well, I have chosen 6 texts for this presentation. Although there are many texts, we have the first text which I have chosen is Uriya writer Fakir Mohan Senapati's work Ribati. This is a very interesting short story which talks about deaths caused due to cholera and the dislocation of the families that usually takes place during pandemic. And this is the story of Sham Bandhu Mohanty, the Zamidar's accountant. He is living a very comfortable life with his wife and his mother and daughter. But as ill luck would have it, he dies due to cholera, and after a few months, his wife also passes away, and the young daughter is left in the care of her grandmother. Now, this daughter was given the permission for education by her father, which the grandmother never liked. And now she holds her responsible for bringing this disaster of death in the family because of her education. And as the story moves forward, we find that the last hope of Revati and her grandmother, the teacher Vasudeva, also becomes a victim of cholera. Now, one dialogue which the grandmother always repeats, cursing the Rebati, is that Rebati Rebi, you fire that turns all to ashes. She thinks that because of her desire for education, she has brought this disaster on the family, which has ruined the whole of the family. However, her concern for Rebati changes when she finds her suffering with fever and there's nothing in the home. So she takes one last bowl, which is brass bowl, which is left, to sell it to the grocery shop owner and buys her rice for food. And when she returns, she is unable to find Rebati inside, and she looks for her in the veranda and again curses her. But then she finds she is no more alive. She is dead. And what happens is, with a thud, two bodies fall down on the ground. One is of Rebati and the other is of her grandmother. Now, what the story to this cholera pandemic also tries to put forth is that in the early times, the intense fear of pandemics was mainly fueled by a firm belief in the supernatural origin, a matter of divine agency, normally punishment, so that the innocent and the guilty can be properly distinguished. And the story illustrates that disease and the resulting devastation, suffering, and death are directly attributed to heavenly punishment on the family for allowing a daughter for education. Another story which I have taken up for today's presentation is Doodh Ka Dam, which in English means price of mother's milk. This is the story of Mangal, the son of Bhungi, the sweeper who also served as the midwife in the village and also was the vet nurse of Suresh, the Zamidar's son. Mangal's father uh, dies due to cholera, due to plague, and the mother uh, has a snake bite and she too dies. And this boy now survives on the leftovers of Zamidar and his son. And the novel concludes with the last dialogue uttered by Mangal. And I quote, people say no one can pay back the price of mother's milk. And see, this is what I am being paid, unquote. Another story of Premchand, which is very interesting with regard to the pandemic, is Hamid. It talks about a young boy who lost both his father and mother to cholera, and then he's left in the custody of his grandmother. And the story opens, it is Eid festival, and they are going to the mosque, but he has only 3 paisa with him. And he thinks, looking around his friends who are buying toys and everything, he also wants to eat sweets, buy toys. But then he doesn't have the money. And in the end, he ends up buying a pair of tongs for his grandmother so that she does not burn her fingers next time she makes chapatis for him. The next story which I have taken up for the presentation is Bechan Sharma Ugra's short story, Vibhattas, which in English translation means patient. This is the story of Sumera, whose goat dies and she has a bloated stomach, and the wife and the son tell him not to eat the raw meat of the goat, but he eats. And as a cart driver, now when this is against the background of influenza pandemic, and as a cart driver he thinks that this is the best time for him to make money by taking the corpses on his cart to drown them in the river Ganga. And his wife and his son, they leave for their grandparents' house, and after a few days, foul smell emanates from the home, and the neighbors find that he is dead, and he has that bloated stomach like that of the dead goat. So apart from the backdrop of pandemic, it also talks about poverty, how it aggravates people's problems, the greed, and the unconcern of others towards people's suffering. Another very interesting story written in 1937 by Rajinder Singh Bedi is Quarantine. And it is again set against the background of plague, and uh, everywhere we find the story opens and the narrator tells us the placards are there: no rats, no plague, no quarantine. And the story juxtaposes a doctor who, after returning home, and I quote, made it a routine to gargle with the antibacterial solution, drink brandy or hot coffee, which I think we can all relate to. This is what we had been practicing during the COVID-19 and even today, to keep the virus away, with Bhargav, who is the sweeper in the hospital where the doctor is working, and whose duty is to wake up at 3 in the night, slug down half a quarter of liquor, and would sprinkle chuna, that is limestone, on the streets and drains to control the spread of germs, and collect the dead bodies to dispose them. And as the story moves forward, this Bhargav comes running to doctor asking him to help him, since his wife has also got fever and boils have appeared on her body. First, the doctor scolds her. He tells her to go away. He doesn't want himself to be a victim of the plague. But then good sense prevails on him and he goes. He gives her the medicine, but he's unable to save her. And he feels guilty. And then next day he finds Bhargav in the hospital. And the Bhargav tells him, well, the wife is dead, but it is his moral responsibility to save others, because death will only come when it will be his time to leave the world. And after many years, uh, when things become normal, the doctor is honored by the minister and he receives cash, garlands. And when he reaches home, he's feeling very happy. And there on the gate, he finds Bhargav, who congratulates him. And he feels a shiver down his spine. And I quote from the text: the burden of garlands became heavy on my neck now. The money in my pocket started to burn my thighs. I felt the utter futility of my life and pitied this death-ridden humanity. The next work, Plague Ki Churail, The Witch of Plague, again is the story of a wife who is suffering from fever. The doctor is called, but he doesn't examine her. He just looks at her from a distance and says she is dead. Now Thakur and his son, they leave, though the son doesn't want to leave his dead mother, so they leave, and giving some money to the servants for the last rituals. And when the midwife starts to wash the dead body, she tells the other servants and the pandit that there is some life in her, but nobody takes her seriously, and she thinks she's a witch. She also runs away. Now they decide that instead of cremating the body, they'll drown it in the Ganges. But one of the servants, Satya, doesn't agree to it. And as the story moves forward, we find that this lady, her plant gets struck somewhere near a ghat, and a girl who comes there to fetch water thinks she's a witch, and she runs away. It's good fortune that she was desperate for her son, and the son comes to her, and she reunites with her son. And what is interesting about these two stories is that these two stories somewhere revolve around the female characters, but they have been narrated by the male writers, also throwing light on the silence and the subjugation of women. And the stories which I have discussed, they throw light on the different responses to the pandemic, which were affected by the financial status and social class of the people. The rich managed to either isolate themselves at home, whereas the poor, in the absence of physicians, care, and servants' attendants, perished day and night like bees. And in the stories, we find that besides pandemic, certain qualities such as greed, avarice, corruption, and the lack of empathy emphasizes the value of survival and returning to ordinary life after an extraordinary crisis. In this sense, not being out by the disease is actually a special kind of victory and a survival mechanism. And I quote, state, the human capacity to create and to pursue meaning via art, story, and shared community. These works offer an unusually hopeful and optimistic vision of an otherwise bleak world. The stories serve the human need for artistic expression and the healing role of art during disasters of great magnitude. To conclude, the paper argues that while pandemic literature might initially seem as only addressing archetypal fears of disease and extinction, a deeper look reveals that it can be viewed as an archive of a wide range of time and culture specific fears. And to conclude, the reading of these texts not only helps us to exorcise the memories of COVID-19, but also, as I take the words of Professor Julie Gerland, to heal, empower, and enlighten. Thank you so much.